851. Go ahead and disregard the checks. We got him at San Pacific. Out there.
A teenage girl in Australia was found dead on the side of a road. Her boyfriend became the prime suspect. Eventually, he confessed to her murder, but so did another man. Who was telling the truth? It took 40 years, a writer and a pedestrian crash reconstructionist to finally uncover the truth. The city of Perth sits on the western coast of the vast continent of Australia. It's a modern example of the industrious but laid-back Aussie lifestyle, where beaches, barbecuing, and sport are critically important. In 1963, the city was smaller, but not that different.
Perth had been a sleepy little hollow, just a beautiful little town where you'd never thought of any sort of crime or murder. Very innocent, very secure.
At that time, John Button was a teenager in love with 17-year-old Rosemary Anderson.
Very quiet, a bit headstrong at times, but very enjoyable company-wise.
On John's 19th birthday, Rosemary stopped over at John's house to celebrate. John's little brother was also there. The three teens spent the night watching television.
While they were eating the fish and chips, John, watching TV, saw a hand come across for his piece of fish, yelled at the person thinking it was his little brother, but it was Rosemary. She got upset. She stormed off and said that was over. She was walking home.
Button said he got into his car and drove alongside her, apologizing and trying to convince her to get into the car so he could drive her home.
She'd done that once before, and after he stopped for a little while, and after a 5-minute walk on her own, she cooled down. He thought she would do that again.
So he watched as Rosemary walked under a railway overpass and around the corner.
I sat there, I smoked a cigarette, and just in those 2 or 3 minutes, she was out of sight.
John claimed he drove after Rosemary and found her face down on the side of the road, unconscious, bruised, and bleeding.
So without thinking, I just put her straight in the car and rushed her straight off to her family doctor.
Dr. Alistair Turner treated Rosemary that night.
She had severe injuries where she was scraped down the road to her face and to her limbs, and her blood pressure was very unstable, going up and down as she was losing blood into abdominal organs and so on. So really, I don't think she ever had any chance of survival.
When the police arrived, they noticed a dent on the front of John's car. And they also noticed fresh blood. John was interrogated for several hours.
There was the accusations. Why did you knock her down? We know it was you that knocked her down. Of course it was you. Look at the front of the car, it's damaged. You had an argument, it must have been you.
Eventually, Button confessed to hitting his girlfriend with his car. In his written confession, he admitted the couple's argument was over something more than a piece of fish.
They wrote down that I tried to get fish with Rosemary. I tried to come on to her, and she refused my advances, and that's what caused the argument.
When Rosemary refused to get in the car, Button said he got angry and tried to scare her, so he sped towards her, intending to stop, but lost control of the car and inadvertently hit her. Prosecutors had all they needed for a conviction. Just a few hours after he confessed to killing his girlfriend with his car, John Button recanted. He now said his confession was coerced and that police hit him during the interrogation.
And I think it was after about 4 hours of questioning that I received a quick punch to the stomach, which put me underneath the table. They pulled me out and sat me back in the chair again, and I realised at that point that they weren't going to let me out of here until they got a confession. And the way they were going was just going to get more and more physical.
Button said the body damage on his car happened a few weeks earlier, and that Rosemary's blood dripped onto the front bumper when he picked her up to take her to the hospital. Trevor Condren examined the car at the request of the local police.
If this car had struck a pedestrian, I would have expected to find damage to the bonnet, like such as dented bonnet, drag marks, scrape marks.
But John Button went on trial for murder, and his earlier confession made it an open and shut case. The jury deliberated for 6 hours before returning to the courtroom with their verdict.
Members of the jury, how do you find the accused? Guilty or not guilty?
Not guilty, Your Honour.
I'm thinking I'm going home. Could I go now? Could I run for the door? And I decided, well, I better not. I better wait until the judge tells me I can go. So I turned back to the judge.
Order! Order!
Oh, terribly sorry, Your Honour. I made a mistake. We find him guilty.
Order!
The judge had to say guilty of what? Guilty of manslaughter.
A manslaughter verdict meant John Button's life had been spared, but he was sentenced to 10 years of hard labor in Fremantle Prison.
The police succeeded in the jury thinking he was a terrible young man trying to have sex with that beautiful young girl. I've heard that that's what the foreman of the jury said. Hang the bastard, trying to have sex with that beautiful young girl.
Why did I sign that confession? Why did they force me into it? Why did we have that argument with my girlfriend?
Fremantle Prison was a relic from Victorian times, with no plumbing, heating, or air conditioning.
You're locked up in a cell with nothing but a mattress on the floor, a rubber bucket in the corner, a plastic plate and a wooden spoon. A very simple little argument over just a small bit of fish. That's all that it started with.
7 months later, another man arrived at Fremantle Prison to await his execution. Eric Edgar Cook had been convicted of killing a young man in cold blood. He had also confessed to other acts of random violence.
Well, Cook confessed to 8 murders and about 12 home invasions in which women were attacked in their beds.
But that wasn't all. Incredibly, Cook also said that he was the one who killed Rosemary Anderson. Cook said he intentionally ran her down when she was walking on the side of the road. For John Button, it was an answer to his prayers.
As soon as my lawyer came in and told me of this confession, I believed them. Well, this is it. I'm free. It's only a matter of time.
And for the first time, Button recalled seeing Cook's car pass him when he was looking for Rosemary that night.
What I didn't realise at that very moment, as it's turned out, driving past on the other side of the railroad line at that moment was Eric Cook.
But there were problems with Cook's confession. Police took Cook to the scene of Rosemary Anderson's murder and asked him to identify where the incident took place. Cook pointed to the wrong spot. Police didn't believe Cook's story, so the court denied John Button's appeal.
What should have happened is that the Court of Criminal Appeal should have ordered a retrial of John Button, at which Eric Cook would be the star witness.
Button clung to hope until the day it disappeared, along with the birds gathered on the roof of the prison gallows.
They all of a sudden just fly off into the air as the trapdoor is released. And you know just by that a person's been hanged.
Eric Edgar Cook was executed.
I knew that once Eric was hanged, that was the end of any chance I had of being released.
The minister attending Cook's execution said Cook took the Bible from his hands and again confessed to Rosemary's murder. But it was of no help to John Button. It would take years before he'd get another chance to prove his innocence. After serving 5 years of a 10-year sentence, John Button was released from prison for good behavior. The first thing he did was visit Rosemary Anderson's grave.
He was out of prison physically, but not out of prison emotionally. He led his life with a big sign over his head, convicted killer, and a big rock in his heart, injustice.
Button eventually got married, had 2 children, found a job, and battled a serious depression.
I desperately wanted to live, but the heartache and the pain of living with the injustice was so intense that I knew that I just wasn't going to make it, that I'd finish up doing something foolish. It was 7 years after I was released, I did do something foolish.
In desperation, Button took an overdose of sleeping pills, got into his car, and drove off a steep embankment at 100 miles an hour. Miraculously, he survived.
From that point on, my life changed completely. And a couple of things that I asked of this God that had watched over me was, would he give me back a life, and would he give me justice in my lifetime?
He wrote to government officials looking for a way to clear his name, with no luck. He even tried writing a book, but no publisher would touch it.
And I remember standing there with the rejection slip in my hand, and I raised my hands up and I said, God, if you want this book written, you better do something. And the phone rang. It was my brother ringing me up to just to mention that he'd been out dancing with a young lady last night, and he told her about the injustice, and she wanted to meet me.
The call was about Estelle Blackburn, a journalist and the former government press secretary. She was intrigued by the case and agreed to help investigate Button's story.
I had the skills, and the doors that were slammed shut in his face opened for me. I had the networks and the contacts. I could get the files and everything that he needed. I knew how to research. I was playing a detective. I was investigating a 30-year-old murder, trying to find fresh evidence.
Blackburn wasn't entirely convinced that Button was innocent. She had serious doubts about Eric Cook's credibility.
Now, I lived through the Cook era. I knew Cook didn't run down girls. Cook shot people. And later we learnt that he stabbed and strangled as well. But he certainly didn't run down girls.
But in the files of Button's 1964 appeal, Estelle found something surprising, something that had not been widely reported 30 years earlier. 6 women had survived hit-and-run car crashes, and Eric Cook had confessed to being the driver in each of them. Each woman's story was eerily similar to Rosemary's. Young women on dark, isolated roads, run down by a stolen car. Estelle eventually wrote her own book about John Button's case, and she too had problems finding a publisher. That is, until she asked her friend, a local newspaper publisher, for help. When Brett Christian read the manuscript, he agreed to personally finance the publication of Blackburn's book.
Having met John, I realised it was just not possible for him to have done it. And it didn't seem, the physics didn't seem right to me either.
Christian also questioned the lack of damage to the front of Button's car.
The police were trying to say that John's little lightweight French Simca had hit a girl hard enough to kill her, and yet there was really no discernible damage on it. Didn't add up, it simply didn't add up.
But could science back up his suspicions? The answer to that question would come from the world's smartest crash test dummy. Estelle Blackburn's book convinced many that John Button was innocent, and that serial killer Eric Cook was the one who killed Rosemary Anderson.
Without a legal verdict, I was still classed as a killer, a convicted killer.
His only hope of overturning the verdict was to find new or fresh evidence in this 37-year-old case.
Fresh evidence at law in this jurisdiction is evidence which was not available at the time of the trial, which obviously didn't feature at the time of the trial, and which could not, with reasonable diligence, have been available at the trial.
Publisher Brett Christian believed so strongly in Button's innocence that he searched all over the world for an expert in the new field of forensics called pedestrian crash reconstruction. In Texas, he found Rusty Haight, a former policeman and one of the most respected crash reconstructionists in the field.
Accident reconstruction is an effort to explain how a car crash happened. We use a lot of common sense, some elementary applied physics, and more common sense, and try to piece together the objective information we have for a given car crash to make some sense of it, to sort out how things happened.
When Haight first looked at photographs taken of John Button's car after the accident, he didn't believe there was damage consistent with a fatal collision.
Rosemary Anderson, the girl that was hit by a car, was hit in the range of 30 to 40 miles an hour. And that leaves, that kind of contact with the body leaves distinctive marks on a car. And there were none of those marks on the car that I saw photos of, nothing even close.
The mark would be on the hood because of the way a body moves when hit at that speed.
I think you can envision, a person as they're struck by a car, basically wrapping or bending onto the front of the car. The technical term we use when we're describing the trajectory is a wrap trajectory, where the force applied on the body is below the body's center of mass, and so the body's going to bend, usually about the waist, and that's going to leave some sort of mark in the hood.
But in an appeals court, Haight would need more than just an opinion. He would need hard forensic proof. For that, he needed to perform pedestrian crash tests on a 1963 Simca brand car, a model that by this time was 35 years old. Despite the age, Brett Christian found 3 usable cars. He also found a 1963 Holden, the model Eric Cook said he was driving when he killed Rosemary Anderson.
Cook's version is that he drives up behind her and hits her from behind.
A biomedical dummy was used to mimic the reactions of Rosemary's body. Haight suspended it by a fishing line that breaks on impact. The police didn't accept Eric Cook's version of the crash because the exterior sun visor on his car wasn't damaged as one would expect. When Haight's test car struck the dummy from behind, it rolled onto the hood and over the roof, just as Eric Cook had claimed.
But I was focused on the visor. I was focused on the alignment, and then I looked at the visor, and I remember seeing the visor bend when the dummy hit it. And it sent a cold chill up my back. I thought, no, this is not good. It can't be good.
But the visor had snapped back into shape with no damage. This explained why Eric Cook's visor showed no damage when police inspected it.
They actually flex. That's what this visor had done when the body hit it. So now all of a sudden what was kind of a tense moment became, hey, we've done it.
So the dummy did exactly what Cook said. It was just a moment of, wow, this is it, we've done it.
And the dummy landed face down, consistent with how John Button found Rosemary's body. But the tests on John Button's car, the Simca, were even more persuasive.
We found marking at the leading edge of the hood, and more important, we found a big dent, a big depression in the hood, where the dummy had come down and basically smacked its head on the hood. Whether we hit it on the right, more in the center, or on the left, it just didn't matter.
There was no similar damage to Button's car, and each time the dummy landed on its back, inconsistent with the injuries on the front of Rosemary's body. Rusty Haight concluded that John Button did not kill Rosemary Anderson.
So with Estelle's research and with with Haight's evidence, we were able to show both of those things. A, it must have been Cook, and B, it could not have been Button. And you can't get a much stronger case than that.
This was enough to convince 3 judges on the Supreme Court of West Australia
that the verdict must be regarded as unsafe and unsatisfactory on the ground that there has been a miscarriage of justice.
We went back and corrected a wrong, and we did it with an appropriate use of the forensic evidence, but also a liberal use of good investigative techniques that didn't come from the police, that came from basically lay people.
I think it makes us all a little bit more aware of the fallibility of the system and have a little bit more faith that it can be rectified and that it is possible.
It's the advance of science that's only just been made possible, and the recognition of that branch of science, that is motor vehicle crash reconstruction, that I would say beyond any doubt put the seal of success on John Button's case.